And
You're gone.
I'd like to start the meeting off with the Pledge of Allegiance. Danielle? I pledge allegiance
To the flag
Good flag.
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
indivisible,
with liberty and justice for all.
all.
Thank you very much, everybody. A moment of silence, please, for our brave men and women fighting all over the world for democracy and freedom, and especially for our first responders during this epidemic. Hats go off to our police and all our first responders, the police, firemen, all medical people. Thank you very much. We really appreciate it. A motion to approve the agenda. I need a motion.
All motion.
Alan, I need a second. Is Ed around? We don't have, I guess we have a quorum.
We have a quorum, yeah.
Yeah, I know. Thank you, Alan. Okay. So I had the first and the second. All say aye, approve.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. So moved. Motion to approve minutes from the August 10th, 2020 town board meeting.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None said. We move on. Authorized payments of the bills in the amount of $169,523.66. I need a motion to pay the bills, gentlemen. It's easy. You just two of you.
I'm waiting. Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? We'll pay the bills. Now we have presentations. We have Emma.
Emma, I don't know if she got on. She was trying. She just emailed me and said her internet went down and she's trying to log back in. So I don't know if she tried again now or do you see her?
No, I don't see her yet, but I'll keep an eye.
So we'll go to Katharina. Hi, Katharina. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So you would like to just talk to the board exactly what you're proposing and.
Okay. My name is Katerina. I would like to raise awareness in our town about ovarian and gynecological cancer.
Is there excuse me, Katharina, is there somebody, can you?
Somebody's leaving a message on the machine, on the answering machine.
What is that? TV on? Or
No, somebody was leaving a message on the answering machine.
Oh, okay. So could you please start from the beginning? Appreciate it.
My name is Katerina, and I would like to raise awareness in our town about ovarian and gynecological cancer. The awareness month for these cancers is September, and it's a cause close to my heart because my grandma is a 17-year survivor of ovarian cancer. And an estimated 30,000 women will not survive out of the 98,000 diagnosed with gynecological cancer. And the 5-year survival rate for ovarian cancer is only 47%. So it's one of the most deadly cancers that women could be diagnosed with. And the reason I want to raise awareness is because not a lot of people know about this, and I want to bring attention to the issue. The symptoms are silent and can often be misinterpreted as gastrointestinal issues. And unlike other cancers, there is no preventative testing such as a mammogram or colonoscopy. The ribbons for these types of cancers is blue and purple, like a tealish color. So what I'd like to do is hang ribbons up around our town. And I would ask the business for permissions in their storefronts or on the poles outside. And the ribbons would be hung up from the end of August to the first week of October. Some other towns around us do this. I believe Montgomery is one of them. And I'm planning on asking the local floral shops for donations towards the ribbon, or I'm going to use my own money and my friends and family. I hope you will consider this project because it means a lot to me and it's something that I want to bring awareness and attention to. Thank you for your time.
It's not, and thank you for making us aware of your concerns about this disease or this cancer. And basically, I have no problem if the town board has any concerns, Howard or Alan. I think it's a great service that you're doing, and I commend you for it. And thank you for coming on and explaining it to the board and the board members. So you definitely have our okay and full steam ahead, as they say. So good
you.
luck. And if you need any help, please call my office and we'll try to get that going also. And Mark Reynolds is on the Zoom. So maybe Mark would like to cover a story about that too, right, Mark?
Yeah, okay.
All right.
Yeah,
Okay.
Al, is there anything we can do up at the Cluett Chance Park? I think we have a message board up there, and maybe explain it real quick, and then maybe put one of those ribbons on there to say
Yeah,
what it's, what it
absolutely.
signifies.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the park is getting a lot of use now, so that'd be a good place to put it. Thank you, Alan, for suggesting that. So, go ahead,
I
Ken.
could do something, and so you can have to put up if you'd like.
Okay, sounds great.
Okay.
Sounds great. Thank you very much. Any questions from?
Al,
Yeah.
can I get Katerina's phone number?
Well,
8:40.
maybe.
No, let's not do it here.
Yeah.
Well, Katerina, can you send me an email? My email's underneath my name in the paper?
Yeah.
Okay,
I'll follow through with that too, Mark,
okay.
to make sure you get her all her info. Thank you very much, Mark.
Thanks.
So, did Emma, was she able to get on, or?
I haven't seen
No,
her.
that-
Hang on a second.
There's a phone number down there.
I see a
Yeah,
phone number, but
Jeff McKeel and Manny Tauchi just came on. There's a phone number.
Hey, Manny, Jeff. So, if she does get on, we'll interrupt poor my good friend Dennis Doyle, and we'll get her back on. It's a worthy cause that she's trying to do, and I followed through, Alan, with your suggestion of just running a pipe, temporary like we do at the Chance Park, and I had followed through with Charlie, and he got prices for me for black pipe for 3/4 and 1 inch. So it's a minimal charge. It's around $400 or $500. So once she gets on, we'll go through that. And thank you for that suggestion, Councilman Kinnick. Dennis, you want to talk about short-term rentals?
Sure. First of all, I want to thank the board and members of the other agencies and boards that are on for the invitation. I do have what I hope would be a short presentation. So if I can be allowed to share the screen, I think that would work for us. If not, I can do it without a short presentation, just be without the presentation, but just be aware that when I'm in presentation mode, I actually can't see you. So if Howard can interrupt if people have a question or use the chat function or something of that nature, and then I can stop so that we can answer questions as we go. But I'll try to lay out the rationale behind regulation of short-term rentals and some of the pitfalls and some of the way that other communities have done this. So with that, can I be allowed to share the screen, Howard?
You should be able to share it. I just gave you that.
Let me see if I can find it. There we go. I'm not seeing it.
I did put your presentation on the website that you did a while back. Is it the same one?
It's a little bit different. I made a little bit changes to it. Let's try that and see if that works.
There you go.
Yeah, I'm got there, but I got to get to the presentation. So.
Well, we can see it anyway, what you're doing, so that's a good sign.
That's good. Should open.
Yes.
Hopefully.
Yep.
Okay, there we go. So with that, let me just go to
It says upload completed.
Yeah, I'm trying to explore it. There we go. Okay. So
Okay. I don't see anything.
you don't?
No.
We don't see the presentation. We see your screen, but we don't see the presentation.
Huh. You don't see it now at all?
No, I see where it says short-term rentals, community presentation, and
But
documents.
you don't see the upload, huh?
No.
The only thing we see is your box that says upload complete, and then it has a close button next, to hit, which you probably
Sorry.
already did.
You see it now?
No.
Can you jump back a screen?
Danielle, do you have it?
I think Dennis just said that it's a little bit different from the one that's on the website, but I could share the one that's on the website if that's helpful.
Yeah, if you could do that, that will help. And then I can tell you where I've made some changes.
Yeah, I sent
apologize.
that to Danielle to put on.
Am I good, Howard, to go?
Yeah, everybody should have the capability to share a screen.
Okay, I just need Dennis to stop sharing in order for me to.
Got it.
Okay, there we go. Thank you.
Sorry.
That's okay. And community presentation. There we go.
Well, I'm opening this up on another computer that's at the house just to see if I can see where the differences are. Okay.
I think Joe LaFaro is just joining us too.
Sometimes when I share, it jumps back to the beginning, but I will keep up with you.
Can you enlarge that or not?
I don't know how you see. I'm on my phone, so.
Okay.
Individuals can do that by view options, right?
Think so.
You go up the top and there's a view options button at the top and you can increase the size.
Yeah, it goes back to the original size. That'll work. So let me just try to talk you through it and see if that works.
Okay. We could see it, Dennis. We could read it. Short-term rentals.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the things that we certainly know is that short-term rentals have really exploded in Ulster County. I did add a screen that's not on this presentation that shows the number of short-term rentals in the county. We're now at over 1,790 short-term rentals countywide. To give you a sense of this, from the highs, Woodstock has a little over, and the county uses a service called Short-Term Rental Helper, STR Helper, to help us confirm short-term rentals and where they are, and then we send them letters relative to our ability to tax them and require them to pay the room tax. So Woodstock is a high at about 400, a little over 400. And to be quite frank, Marlborough is one of the lowest towns. There's only about 18 confirmed short-term rentals in Marlborough. So, and then when we start talking about short-term rentals, if we can move that slide down, I don't know if you can move that slide down, Danielle.
Sure. Which one do you want?
Go to the next slide. I'll tell you.
It jumps around. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
I don't know how well it's working on your end.
Let me run. I'll run through this then. I'll send everybody the updated regulations. So one of the things that we have to know is what our current communities doing with respect to short-term rental regulations. And I would say that out of the 20 towns in the county and 3 villages in the city, maybe 3 of them or 4 of them have regulations that actually specifically call out short-term rentals. So the first thing that you need to know is that most zoning statutes in most communities have no regulations with respect to short-term rentals, and they're relying on, in many instances, their existing regulations that talk about things that may be like short-term rentals but are not short-term rentals. And the town of Hurley ran into this, where they basically had a short-term rental that they were trying to close up, and they were using their bed and breakfast regulations to try to deal with short-term rentals. And the judge, they lost that court case, and the town basically went back and started to think about short-term rental regulations rather than try to use their existing zoning statute. The other thing that ends up happening is, with respect to the lack of regulation of short-term rentals, is there's a lack of registration of those short-term rentals. And the registration, I think, is important from a public health and safety standpoint. So if you don't know what's there, it's very tough to regulate it or to understand it. Let me give you a comparison in terms of why regulate short-term rentals, or how intrusive short-term rentals regulations are. The first thing I would say is that towns routinely regulate and provide standards for bed and breakfasts. So if your own statute provides standard for bed and breakfasts, towns also routinely provide standards for inns and hotels. Last but not least, towns provide regulations for home occupations. And if you look through some town codes, not necessarily under the zoning statute, but you'll also see regulations for yard sales and those kinds of things, or flea markets, et cetera. So the regulation of short-term rentals is not intrusive. It's literally something that towns would do to any other use, except the short-term rental folks have a better lobby. So why consider regulation? And the short answer for why considering regulation is the effect on community organizations, the impact on other forms of lodging, the impact on housing costs and rental costs. And then the biggest thing is, when you look at this, it really is the difficulty associated with the impact on quality of life for neighbors and people that live next to or in proximity to short-term rentals. And that's where we see most of the efforts for short-term rentals focused on. So the next question you ask is, do you want to ban them, or do you want to regulate them? Cities, I will tell you, across the United States have moved to ban short-term rentals completely in many instances. I shouldn't say in many instances, in some instances, let's put it that way. There are reasons not to ban short-term rentals, and those are that they are literally a market favorite in terms of people coming to stay. They help increase economic activity, particularly for local businesses, and in some instances may be crucial towards Main Street's survival, particularly in towns that don't have formal lodging facilities. And that's why they're so popular in the mountain communities, because there aren't any large hotels or any types of formal lodging facilities in those areas. They also have an effect on land use. They drive a tourism economy, and they use existing structures. So if you think about a land use perspective, reuse of existing structures and making your housing stock work harder is something that's actually environmentally friendly. And they can provide a real economic reason for community investment. And some communities have used the short-term rental regulation in terms of where, when, and how to essentially direct short-term rentals into those areas of the community that are blighted, or those properties within the community that are blighted, that they really want to return to a semi-residential use or a residential use. And at the same time, the economics of turning it into a house or a regular house don't make sense. Or in some cases, they're dealing with multifamily larger structures. They can't meet the hotel's requirements, but they can meet the short-term rental requirements. So we've seen that. Kingston has one of those. I think the town of Kingston, the city of Kingston, have moved in some directions to at least informally encourage short-term rentals in some of these structures that have been vacant or blighted. And the other thing is to think about, and this is particularly true in the mountain communities, is they spawn cottage industries. If you start having a conversation about short-term rentals, I will guarantee you that the real estate companies and the cottage industry companies, those folks that manage short-term rentals, and those folks that essentially work to clean them and make sure that they're operating efficiently, will come out and tell you how important it is and how many people they employ. When we had this conversation in Shandaken, there were people up there that were talking about employing 60 to 100 people that they used on a regular basis to help with their short-term rental business. Any questions?
I'll
So,
have two.
I'll start off, Dennis. You started in the beginning that some towns have not adopted any short-term rental legislation code. Um, and the reason for that is, what would be the reason for not doing it?
In many instances, they haven't received complaints about them, and they haven't moved on the basis of those complaints to essentially that it hasn't sort of caught the attention of the regulatory community. So they haven't moved in that sense. In some instances, it's because of the actual pushback from the short-term rental folks themselves relative to proposed regulations. And so there's been, for example, the town of Gardner is considering a short-term, was considering and is considering a short-term rental regulations, and a community group formed that basically represented the short-term rental folks in Gardner and made a case for how strict those regulations should be. And in other instances, it's just that it hasn't caught the attention. The city of Kingston's considering it. Town of Shandaken has gone through this process. Gardner is considering it. We've seen some conversations in the town of Warsing about considering it. Asopa started the conversation. I'm not sure where they went, but currently there are existing regulations in Woodstock, Marbletown, and Hurley relative to short-term rentals, and those are the ones I'm most familiar with because we helped those communities through that. And Rochester actually had a proposed local law, and the village of Ellenville, in the village of Ellenville is actually talking about a significant proposed local law because they've had a lot of complaints about a single Airbnb down there, and that seems to be driving a regulatory response at the community level.
Danielle, can we go back to the full screen,
Sure.
please? There we go.
Just a quick question. Was that the presentation? That was.
No, I've got a whole bunch of more slides if you don't mind.
I don't mind. I
don't mind, no.
So one of the things, what constitutes effective regulation? So that becomes the crux of the matter. What constitutes? And from my perspective, what we tell communities to do is take a look at your policy objectives. That's the first thing. What do you want to regulate? And out of those things that are impacted, for example, housing costs or quality of life or tax reasons or public safety, which ones do you want to sort of address and how's the best way to address them? So it's a policy discussion first. Then after that, I think the next thing is to try to understand a little bit better what you can enforce. Because it's no sense in passing a law if you don't have the wherewithal or the willingness to enforce it. And what I would tell you is that short-term rental regulations, once you move into much more esoteric regulation processes, become more difficult to enforce, but they become self-enforcing because the neighbors will make you very much aware of violations associated with your statute. And so the considerations is, one is we say that from a regulation standpoint, you should offer opportunities for short-term rentals, particularly in Main Street corridors and along corridors where housing is not necessarily an option. So certainly within your commercial zones, et cetera. The second thing is to address neighborhood issues, and the neighborhood issues are basically all quality of life. Their noise, their hours of operation, they're making sure that you have a responsible party, and then you make sure that people understand the rules, where garbage goes, outdoor parties, fires, all those things that would affect the quality of life in a neighborhood. And then we want to minimize public safety issues. So we'll talk about how to do these things. And then last is, if you're going to allow non-owner occupied or non-primary residence occupied short-term rentals, you really need to think of what that means to the impact on your housing stock, because you literally remove that housing stock from consideration as residents. This is not a home. Once you move to non-owner occupied, it's no longer home sharing. It's no longer home sharing. It literally is a business. And there are individuals that we're aware of in some communities that own multiple Airbnbs. And the real estate interests and the larger interests are starting to figure out that from an investment standpoint, they can invest in those. The housing values then are dependent upon the investment value of an Airbnb or a short-term rental rather than its value as a residence. So those things, and there's studies that back this up, particularly in urbanized areas, that basically say the more you don't regulate non-owner occupied housing, the more it impacts housing costs and rental costs. So the regulatory components, well, what's out there and how do you do it? I have a nice little picture that basically shows you, first thing you do is start with congenial public meetings, which will be anything but congenial. But you need to think about having a conversation before you sort of before you start the process. I think it's really important to have a conversation with your community, and that community consists of stakeholders that are impacted by short-term rentals and those folks that actually operate them. So you have a good understanding of what the community is experiencing from an impact standpoint and what the objectives are of those folks that currently own or operate short-term rentals in the community. And then when you think about the components, the first thing you do is define them. You know, there are different ways that you can define short-term rentals. In general, they've been defined as 30 days or less. So that's generally what ends up happening from a short-term rental. There are communities that basically will define them as 7 days or less. And there are communities that regulate short-term rentals in terms of the time that you can rent. And they require a minimum rent of 7 days or 5 days. So you just can't rent for 1 night or 2 nights or 3 nights. The second thing is to think about permitting.
So can I ask a question? So
Sure,
you're saying the minimum that you're allowed to rent is for a week, 7 days or greater.
No, that's just the opposite. They're requiring you that you have to rent for that amount of time. They won't let you.
That's what I'm saying. So you have to rent from 7 days or greater, right?
Yeah, there are communities that do that. We don't.
7 days or less, right, Dennis? 7 days or less, or 30.
Well, no, they actually say in order to stop the turnover and people moving in and out of the house and the traffic that brings, they basically say you can rent, but you can only rent for, it has to be a minimum of 7 days, not a minimum or less, a minimum of 7 days or 5 days.
Up to 6 months, correct? I mean, something like that. Because in the example from Woodstock, it says the maximum was 186 days. So it's like a minimum of 7 days. Maximum.
Yeah, let me see if I can separate the two out for you. I know where you're going, and I think I can separate them out for you. One is the number of days you can rent the unit, and the other one is the number of days the unit has to be rented for. So the first thing is you can only rent the unit for up to 180 days, right? Then you're done. We don't care how many times you rent it to anybody, but once you hit 180 days, you're done. The second piece of that is you can only rent for 7 days at a block. So if you would take 180 days and divide it by 7, that's the number of times you can rent the unit. So you think about it in two different ones. One is the total amount of days the unit can be rented. The other one is essentially the block of days you have to rent it for. We don't see we haven't seen any of that block of days, but it is out there, and I just wanted to bring it to your attention. We haven't seen that in Ulster County. Sure.
Dennis, I think, just to back up a minute, a short-term rental needs to be rented at least 1 day, but not more than 30 days to qualify as a short-term rental. And then each community can develop different regulations within that framework, correct?
Let me see if I can, I'm not saying you're wrong, but let me just say is that if you want to think about this in planning board terms, this is like defining a subdivision. It is what you define it to be. So if you define short-term rentals as being less than 30 days, you certainly can do that. And if you define a block of rental units that they have to rent for, you can do that. So the definition is yours. It's not the state's.
But
Right, so we could
anything over 30 days is not a short-term rental.
In general, that's correct.
General, right.
Right. In general, that's correct, because it kicks off other kinds of things with respect to residency.
Right.
Dennis, we find that people have, so take your 7-day example. So if I were to rent for 3 days, but then not rent another 4 days, you're kind of skirting the issue. And that's what we find. I'm in Maine right now, and that's how they skirt it here. That they're allowing, they establish a minimum, but then people will rent and then just not rent again, so you're not getting that
And that's fine. It's lost income, but what you're trying to do is reduce traffic and turnover in the neighborhood. So that's what you're trying to do. If you're only renting for 3 days, that's fine, you know, but you're unable to rent again until 7 days are up.
Correct.
And that's a policy response. So the other
just a quick question here. Who's enforcing this? Who would enforce the 7-day rule or the 5-day rule, the 3, whatever rule we come up with? Who's going to enforce that?
would have to be through your building inspector.
Building inspector.
Not happening.
That's what I was just going to bring up, Tom. Thanks for the quick input. But between code enforcement and building inspecting, I mean, is he going to drive around? Let's say we only have, what I think you said, 18 of them. What if we go to 36? What if we go to 72? What if we go to 120?
Well, you look at ways to pay for the enforcement, and the way you pay for the enforcement is to license them. And you collect a licensing fee, and that helps to pay for the enforcement.
That's what happens here. You have to get a license to rent, and you have to have an inspection, and they look
Right.
at plumbing issues, fire escapes, all that kind of stuff. And then the license renews every year. It's like $40 or something for the year. But
Yeah,
then
I mean,
once you do that,
we've seen license fees as high as $500.
Right.
We've seen license fees that high.
40.
Well, I think if we had established a license fee, it would be based on the hiring of a new employee. So we would have to actually do the math on that, what annual salary, benefits, retirement, and all that would have to be before we could even establish it. And at 18, it would be a lot higher than if it was 72.
Well, what you'd end up doing is I always think that fees are a rational nexus between costs, and you can't justify a cost of a single employee. So you end up you don't hire an employee, you end up doing the licensing through a consulting service or an inspection service. You can do that as well. And then you have a rational nexus between the fee that's charged and the time and what it's cost to the community itself. There's other ways to think about this than just hiring an employee, if that's the way you move. But I just want to talk about permitting and review. So permitting and review comes in 2 forms. One is the form of whether you're going to do this under zoning, or whether you do some of it under zoning, or whether you do some of it under licensing. And there's 2 different ways, there's 2 different things to think about. In general, from a county planning department standpoint, what we've said to communities relative to owner occupied or primary residence occupied short-term rentals is we think that doesn't require an appearance in front of a local planning board. It's literally a decision of the licensing official, in this case, probably the code enforcement officer. And you would set standards for the licensing. So you'd make sure that fire code, steps, all those things that were standards relative to the number of parking units, the number of bedrooms, et cetera, where essentially it becomes almost a ministerial discussion between the applicant and the zoning enforcement officer or the code enforcement officer. If they meet those requirements, they get their license because they're going to be there on site. And they're going to have to deal with all of the issues that come up. When you moved away from that and you move either to non-owner occupied or non-primary residence occupied, they generally take 2 forms of regulation. One is that you don't care at all about that. If they're non-owner occupied, you just let them go ahead. The other, what most towns have done is say that we're going to restrict non-owner occupancy to the extent that we're going to require a responsible party. And that responsible party has to be available within 5 miles, 10 minutes, pick a number, but something of that nature. So if something goes wrong, the licensed facility essentially has a contact person that corrects it. So that's And then what we've said when we've looked at non-owner occupied facilities, what we've said is we believe that they should be capped. We believe that one of the ways you can do this is to say all of those existing facilities, you treat them like non-conforming uses, where essentially when you pass a zoning statute and you have a non-conforming use section, you give those folks that are essentially non-owner occupied a limited amount of time to register. And then they go through the process, and that's the cap number. And then you start to think about how do you change the cap? And what we try to think about is you change the cap in two ways. One is, remember what I talked about, blighted areas or particular buildings or certain areas of the community where you want these things to occur, you allow them to occur in those instances in those areas without a cap. The other thing that you can think about doing is as you add apartment units and housing units, you can increase the cap by essentially tying the number of non-owner occupied to the number of units that are new units that are created. You can do it 1 for 1, you can do it 10 for 1, you can pick something in there. The main thing is that you're clearly producing housing at the same time you're likely to be taking housing off the market. So that's the balance that you can think about with respect to that.
Dennis?
Yep.
I have a question. What would somebody who owns and occupies a house, but periodically rents out the entire house, they leave the house so that they can rent out the entire house, what would that kind of a situation be considered?
Let me ask you a question, all right? If you were a bed and breakfast, do you require the owner to be present to be a bed and breakfast?
Yes.
Yes.
That's the answer to your question.
So
Well,
in her situation, that's a short-term rental because they're not there.
Right. And from my perspective, if that's what you do, if you think about what I talked about, which is the ability essentially to respond to problems and the ability to have somebody on site immediately there that's going to make sure that the guests know what to do, that essentially the community, if the community responds, there's somebody on site that can tell that can deal with what the problem is. For me, that the idea that you can do that you're not there, you just rent your house out, that's a non-owner occupied facility. The owner's
Okay.
not there when the facility is rented.
Thank you.
You know, there are shades of gray here. You can think about, you know, the example I would give you, if you think about Saratoga or hits in Saugerties, where the community just gets up and leaves during the racing season. And that's what ends up happening. And you could allow that to happen. You could, if you had specific, like, for example, meet me in Marlborough days, where you know you're going to have a huge demand for housing and there's no place to stay in the community. Those are the instances where you can allow that to happen, and without any issues at all, in my opinion. That goes to definitions and flexibility. So the other thing is I just want to talk briefly about prohibitions. And in general, when we end up having a conversation about prohibitions, we usually basically try to prohibit short-term rentals in multifamily structures. Multifamily structures as defined by the building code and also usually defined by the zoning code are usually 3 or more units per building. And so what you're trying to do there is you're trying to make sure that people don't take their apartments or other kinds of things and turn them into Airbnbs, and that or short-term rentals. And that includes both subrents, which have happened, and the actual landlord basically taking an apartment building and saying, I can make 3 times the amount of money renting these as a short-term rental than I can as renting them as apartments. And they just pull them off the market and rent them. So we advocate for condominiums, townhouses, and any attached dwelling and any multifamily dwelling that you simply say you're not permitted. So the next big question has to do with accessory buildings and accessory dwelling units. I would suspect, and I don't know the code, maybe Tom can tell me, that the town allows accessory dwelling units in single-family homes with no increase in acreage needed for density purposes. And in some communities, they actually allow them in accessory structures. You can put dwelling units in garages and stuff like that.
No, not allowed.
Not allowed in Marlborough. Well, in some communities, they do allow them. And then the question then becomes, do you want to allow short-term rentals as being owner occupied in those accessory dwelling units? And I can see arguments for and against that. The against part about it has to do with, in many reasons, the reasons that you allowed short-term, that you allowed accessory dwelling units was to provide an affordable component of your housing stock that could help the homeowner, particularly the elderly homeowners, so that they had somebody in their unit that essentially could help them, take them to work, et cetera, et cetera. The other piece of that is it also made the units, the main dwelling unit, more affordable. So it goes either ways. In some instances, you lose the affordability on the apartment side, but you gain the affordability on the entire resident side because these folks are now renting them out for, you know, a substantial amount of money on a weekly basis. So that covers some of the things I wanted to talk about, but I also wanted to talk about licensing, right? And licensing can be as simple as an annual renewal, or it could be every 2 years. And the key with licensing in my mind is the public and safety inspections that need to occur in order for that, and whatever standards you put in the code. And the standards that we normally see in codes relative to short-term rentals, and this is becoming much more prevalent, is limiting the number of people that can be in a unit. And generally it's 2 persons per bedroom and no more than 10 is what we see. And then you also have standards with respect to parking. You have standards with respect to insurance in some instances they require with regard to licensing. The contact standards you have, if you're talking about areas of the community that are, I'm trying to think. Those are the main standards that we've seen. We've seen some people try to deal with septic systems and water supply. You know, we're not there yet on that. But let me give an example of short-term rental units and the health code. You know, short-term rental units that are non-owner occupied are effectively a public water supply, because you're actually using that to probably more than 5 persons at a time that are drinking out of that water supply system. Our health department doesn't regulate them as public water supply. Nobody's caught up to that requirement yet. But effectively, if there's nobody there and you're renting it on a regular basis to a hotel, like you would rent a hotel room, you're a public water supply. You're not basically putting one person at risk or a family at risk. You're putting everyone that's in that unit over time at risk. And we're waiting to see what the state's going to do with regard to that. There's been some discussion about it, but there hasn't been a great move to think about what this means with regard to whether or not they're public water supply. And then the other thing I would say is that you need to give the people in the community some transparency with respect to what you're doing, and that goes to both those folks that own these facilities and operate these facilities, as well as those folks that are impacted by them. And what we've always said is the best thing to do is to try to set up some places where people can complain. So there's a complaint line, and some places where people can essentially go through the process, understand the process of how they're going to get licensed in order to do this. And then if you're going to do a planning board approval, for example, a special permit for non-owner occupied units, then you end up doing them relative to the notice that goes out for planning boards works. I don't know what you require for bed and breakfasts. I don't know whether they're permitted use and there's no planning board review, but I would think that it's fair for short-term rental folks, particularly those ones that are non-owner occupied, to go through a similar process that you would go through for a bed and breakfast.
So basically, we don't have short-term rental code yet, so that's what we're going through now. So I'm a little confused sometimes as a fact, like if I went to one of these providers to see if there was a room available, let's say I was going to the Falcon and there was a concert, and I just wanted to go there for one day, no amenities, no bed and breakfast. Right now, I can't do that. Is that correct, Tom? I mean, with a short-term rental, a person that has a bedroom and a bathroom, I won't be able to do that.
You can.
I'm
because
left.
We don't regulate against it or for it, right? So you could. We have
And
no
that-
regulations for that. Is that right, Tom?
Tom's gone.
Oh.
So I can tell you what happened in Hurley. This is a similar situation that happened in Hurley where they had no specific regulations for short-term rentals, and they tried to regulate them under another
What is
section
Tom?
of the zoning statute. And when they tried to do that, the court said, no, you can't do that. So I don't know what your statutes look like, whether you could regulate them as an accessory use or something of that nature. I just don't know. But I know Hurley tried to do it and was unsuccessful.
Tom, did you hear my question, Tom?
No, I got, internet went off for a second. What's the question?
So basically what I was saying is I go to one of these providers and I'm looking for a room in Marlborough, close to the Falcon. I just want to spend one night, bedroom, shower, no amenities, no bed and breakfast type thing. I can't do that right now. There's no statute in our code that a person could actually rent the one bedroom out.
Well, it's a bed and breakfast. It's a home occupation under special use. Other than that, it's a hotel motel situation, transient. If you want to do something like that. Do we have a hotel motel? No. I mean, but it's an allowed use in the commercial district, the HD district. So a one night rental, you're talking about a transient situation in a hotel commercial, atmosphere that we offer. There's no hotels here. But other than that, you're talking about a home occupation, which is bed and breakfast to stay the one night.
So what happens, Tom,
That's not a bed and breakfast. What he described,
Yeah.
not a bed and breakfast. Kind of.
what happens, Tom, if I'm a homeowner and I just do it and my neighbors complain to you and you say, well, I'm going to regulate you, and I say there's nothing in the code to regulate me under.
Exactly. We have nothing. That's
You're going to issue a cease and desist order, and I'm going to say to you, cite the language in the code that you're making me cease and desist.
Well, I think this comes back into, when I went into who's going to regulate all this, who's going to enforce. Now we're going to ask somebody who's obviously doing this, Dennis, like you just said, what constitutes my wrongdoing, like state the code. So we're going to ask them to, hey, now you got to pony up $800 a year annually to, register yourself as a Airbnb. Are they going to do it? Are they going to be forthcoming in doing it? This to me is,
not at 800. Maybe at 400.
I would cite the section of the code as a commercial entity. They're running a commercial entity as far as rental purposes without regulation.
Yeah.
That's how I would write it. Win, lose, or draw. But if you're renting something for cash, for money, if you're fixing my car for money, it's a commercial business in a residential area. So my section of the code would be you're in the R district, residential district, running a commercial business for rent in the district. Well, how do you know? I take that in front of a lawyer. If you're telling me you've taken that in front of a lawyer, then tell me we did it already.
I think
that's how I would present it to my local justice, that there's a residential district renting rooms out commercially, which is transient. I could define it under the building code as a transient situation, in and out rentals on a daily basis, transient. I would define it under the state code as transient commercial rental as a business, collecting money for services, like I would if everybody's after me to go after the guy, mechanic in his garage, charging people. And when I've been in a judge many a times, and the judge told me if I could prove that individual was charging for the services, a check, a canceled check, a business card with that address on it, then I'd have a leg to stand on. But other than that, somebody's word against somebody's word. I went to this guy's house and he fixed my car and he charged me $500. Well, prove it. So the judge told me if I could prove it, he would side with me. So if I proved in this situation that somebody was renting a house out and they were collecting money for that house under transient definition of the New York State Code, they were running a commercial business in a residential house, and I would take that in front of my local judge. That's how I would handle it.
Now,
Right.
just
Not
to
allowed.
expand on that, Tom, that was very good. Thank you. What we're basically doing here, this is a very slippery slope. I mean, this is new to everybody. It's new to the planning board. It's new to the town board. It's not new. It's been going on maybe for the last, 5 to 10 years. But what essentially we are doing, if you look at it and think about it, we're allowing commercial use in residential areas, RAG and residential. So we have to be very, very careful because now we're allowing one commercial usage based on the definition of what Tom just said. One house, maybe two houses in a neighborhood. And now if the neighborhood is not in agreement, this is almost like spot zoning in a way. I think we have to be very, very careful here.
That's why
we can ruin neighborhoods.
That's why we're trying to put together some regulations that might encapsulate it a little bit, right? I mean, that's why we're here.
A couple of things. One is that my understanding of the court case that Hurley lost was exactly the position of the building inspector in the code enforcement office in Hurley was: you're running a business, you're not running a short-term rental, and you're not permitted in the code. And the judge said that's not good enough, and he tossed the case out, and they had to go back and essentially develop a short-term rental.
Was that in a local jurisdiction or at the county?
I think it was at a Supreme Court level. I'm not sure. I can get you the case. I'll get you the case.
Right.
So basically what we're trying to do, Alan, is, thank you for your input and Tom's input, is to get some kind of handle on this. As Tom said, there's 18 of them already in our town, which we don't have any control over. So we want to have codified law to control some of it. Now, it depends on, like Tom's saying about transient and not, is what do we want to do with the town of Marlborough as far as promote this or not promote it? And I understand Tom's position. He just stated that even though Alan said I wanted one bedroom for the night to go to a concert at the Falcon, which would benefit the Falcon and benefit the local restaurant, but he's saying that it's a bed and breakfast. So Tom's stating that most everything, according to our code, is a bed and breakfast, period. And if you're going to do something like that, you have to go in front of the planning board and you have to become a bed and breakfast. I might have this all wrong, but I think that's what Tom is saying, is that we're not open to any kind of, short-term rental, but everything has to be a bed and breakfast, has to go through the planning board, has to be owner occupied according to our code. So we're just trying to see if we could expand it maybe to different areas, like Dennis was saying, like a commercial spot down in Marlborough, that maybe this would be allowed and it would benefit our local restaurants and the Fountain. That's all I'm saying. It's maybe a happy medium.
Yeah, and Al, I'm just throwing it out there too. I'm not saying I'm for this or against it, but I'm just throwing out the questions because this is going to be very significant, whatever we choose to write, what we agree upon. Now, you just said now we can allow this in the commercial district. So now, how are we going to allow residential in the commercial district?
Well,
we're going to allow somebody to build 3 houses on a commercial lot and offer them as Airbnb. Is that not a hotel?
I don't think that's what I'm talking about.
I'm not saying that's what you meant. I'm asking.
No, I mean, the scenario.
So listen, in the commercial districts, the C1 districts, it allows the residential above the retail, which we promote, because in the commercial districts, we don't want to just have residential. So we always allowed the residential above the commercial entity in the C1 district. So that's allowed now anyway. And again, that's no problem regulated. I have no problem with commercial areas renting. I have a problem in a residential area, the effects on the neighborhood, the fairness to the neighborhood, the fairness to the residents who live there, the quality of life. Mm-hmm. And then that's just for the neighborhood. For me, as a code enforcement officer, as a fire inspector, as a building inspector, it's the safety of the people that are living there and the safety of others.
I agree with you. I agree with you.
So listen.
We have 18 in our town right now.
Right, so
We're
again,
not doing anything about those 18.
call them bed and breakfast, call them home occupation, call them something, but regulate them through the planning board on that type of short term. And they're going to be anything under 30 days. Again, I don't like seeing heavy turnover in a residential district where my residents are. All right. That's my opinion. My opinion is, if you want to do a short-term rental, then it's going to, we say short-term, but I say longer than 30 days or more. If you want to rent it for a short time, rent it for 30 days. You want to rent it for less than 30 days, you want to come in every weekend, you want to rent it for 7 days, then you're a home occupation. I don't care if you label it bed and breakfast. It's a home occupation short-term.
Okay.
But regulate that through the planning board, just like you would a bed and breakfast. If you don't want to call it a bed and breakfast because there's some kind of stigma to that, then call it a home occupation short term. But
we allow other home businesses and other home occupations in the residential district, correct?
right, but again, everything has to be owner occupied. So the owner could take care of the people that are there. So there's no partying going on after 11, 12, 1 o'clock in the morning. They're renting to people that are responsible. So the neighborhood doesn't have to worry about who's in that house this weekend, who's in the house next weekend, what's going on at 2 o'clock in the morning. Because if you're owner occupied, you're going to control that in your own house. If you're not in the house and it's non-owner occupied, it's not being controlled. It's an unsafe situation, and it's detrimental to the neighborhood and residential areas. I have no problem with owner occupied. Owner occupied is a good thing. Owner occupied is recommended, wanted, good, but non-owner occupied is not good. Non-owner occupied is not a good thing.
So owner occupied home occupation.
The scenario that I said was that if Al Lanzetta and Cindy Lanzetta were going out and this lady had her house and she lived in the house and had this bedroom, and it's not a bed and breakfast.
But it's a home occupation. It's the same thing. That's what I'm saying. If you have a problem calling it a bed and breakfast, call it a home occupation and regulate it.
Trying to clarify it. That's all, Tom.
That's what I'm saying. It's the same thing. Bed and breakfast, home occupation. Not a problem.
And just to echo, Tom.
What we're starting to find now, we have a couple instances where, and everybody's pretty familiar with the fact that we've got a B&B that is operating across the street of the homeowners. The people who own the property live directly across the street. We have another application for someone who owns both buildings and wants to rent out the building immediately adjacent to her. And then we have another situation where the owner's daughter lives in the building and they want to be able to rent out 1 or 2 bedrooms. And so in all 3 of those scenarios, honestly, those operations would not be able to happen, correct?
Well, first scenario, illegal, what's happening, that's illegal. Second scenario, the only reason why it's in front of the planning board, because the first scenario was allowed to happen. So that's fine. And the third scenario, if the daughter's living in the house, it still could be considered owner occupied, because if there's a tenant in the house under definition of under New York state law, the person that's occupying the house can be considered owner under the definition under the residential code. So if their daughter's living in it, I don't have a problem with that either.
But
again,
precisely why
But it's not their primary residence.
You know,
it's owner occupied.
It's not.
The owner who's there. If I rent an apartment, under definition, I'm an owner.
Are you under not under zoning definition? You're not.
Under the state code, I am.
Violation. You don't file a violation against the tenant. You file a violation.
Yes, you can. You can violate the tenant.
But you find a code violation, you're filing it against the owner of the house. You're not
if I don't go after.
You're not filing a code violation against a tenant.
The tenant is defined as an owner in the code book.
I'm not arguing that. I'm not arguing. I am telling you that I have never seen a stretch that basically says that we're going to count tenants as being an owner occupied with respect to short-term rentals.
I'm not talking about short-term rentals. I'm talking in general.
Yes, you are. You're basically saying that a short-term rental would be allowed as long as there was a tenant.
She's saying it was the owner's daughter.
Occupied. I'm sorry. I mean, clearly, one of the things that communities have taken a great deal of pain to deal with is to define ownership. And what they've defined ownership is essentially you own the facility and you can't be a tenant in the facility. You own the facility and you have to have a primary interest in the ownership, because the response from the short-term rental industry was to grant the tenant a 1% ownership in the building and call them an owner and to basically do it that way. So there are ways that you can deal with this. You can call them, you can call them a responsible party. You can all kinds of things if you want to allow it to happen. But you should never call a tenant an owner for the purposes of regulating short-term rentals.
It was the daughter of the owner.
Doesn't matter. You shouldn't call a tenant an owner from the purposes of short-term rental.
Okay, so then again, case scenario number 1, illegal. How did that happen?
From my perspective, looking at this, it seems to me that when there's ambiguity in the code,
there's none.
When there's ambiguity in the code in terms of whether or not how you regulate short-term rentals, that it would behoove a community to essentially define what those what they are and how they are. And if you want to call them home occupations, then at least list them. You know, one of the things that you list when you do home occupations, you do such as, you know, and you list them, including. You know, if it's not listed there, then it's not.
Bed and breakfast is certainly listed. But
you know, as a home occupation, I would presume.
it is. Yes, definitely. I mean,
The other situation that you're referring to, though, he claimed on the record that he was going to be occupying the upper floor while the people were there. That was how it was presented to the planning group. He was going to have the top level and occupy the residents while there are renters there.
Dennis, I have 2 questions. One is, within some of the zoning, we saw a distance of 10 miles. Can you limit that to be within the town as opposed to 10 miles, which could be as the crow flies, or it could be along the roads? Or could you do, it can be adjacent, and define adjacent as across the street or next door? Are you allowed to do that, or is defining it as being a resident, would that be not legal to do?
You're talking about the response time. Who's the responsible party if something is non-owner occupied? Well, I think the short answer is yes. You can define it any way you want. I would say that you need to think about what a rational nexus here is. And if the rational nexus is you want a response time for a responsible party, I don't think the town lines matter. I mean, it's literally a response time issue. But I think your biggest difficulty given this discussion is defining what the heck constitutes owner occupancy. You know, and my sense would be is owner occupancy, and we've been really careful in terms of the discussions with local boards about this. Owner occupancy means essentially that you're the primary, it's established as a primary residence. And the reason that you start to do that is from a primary residence standpoint, there's a number of things that you can check. Where do you file your income taxes? Where do you vote? All of those things essentially become, you know, easier things to check if you define these things as primary residence. You know, and if you want to allow family members to live in a house and call that, I mean, that's up to you. But my point being is that the reason that you don't just call, we used to call them an owner and non-owner occupied, is that the response from the short-term rental industry has been to establish ownership by shares. You know, they have a tenant and the tenant owns 1% of the ownership. You know, and if you establish a responsible party and an owner occupancy is essentially 1% of the ownership, it could be the next door neighbor across the street, which the owner of the thing grants a 1% ownership and says, hey, I'm an owner and I'm across the street. You know, so we've sort of been real careful about trying to define these things, thinking about what the response has been from the short-term rental folks as it relates to this. And I want to preface all of this discussion about that. We think that short-term rentals have a place. in a community. We actually believe that there are some significant advantages for short-term rentals that are properly regulated. And I think that these things are particularly advantageous to communities that don't have a lot of, or enjoy an adjacency to a lot of lodging facilities, because it makes those, Al laid out, it makes that instance where you're talking about someone wanting to go to an event and there's no place to go around it. And that way they end up very close to the event. It's probably, from a public safety standpoint, in terms of drinking and other things, if it's walkable, those things are great, you know, and it's not something that you sit back and say, well, we shouldn't allow them, or we should think about them in a different way as being intrusive. We should actually think about them in many instances as being an economic driver in some communities, but think about what thoughtful regulations would do. And Marbletown's sort of struck that balance. Woodstock has struck that balance. Shandaken has working on it. The town of Rochester worked on it as well. I think one of the things that you find out is that we have this discussion as if they're individual owners that essentially are trying to move away from their house and not and rent it out. When in point of fact, when you start this discussion in many communities, what you find out is that one owner owns 5 of them, or one owner owns 6 of them, or one real estate management company is managing 20 of them. And it becomes, when that kind of scale comes in, you get a sense of what's happening to your housing stock. And that's what I would caution you about, it more so in other communities than in Marlborough, because there's only 18 that we can confirm down here.
My second question, I don't necessarily need an answer right now to, and that is, would these fall under ADA regulations for things like parking, et cetera? And I don't expect an answer, but maybe you can look that up and get back to us on that.
You're going to hire 6 new people?
No, I can tell you that
They don't.
they don't. Yeah.
Residential house, it doesn't. And I agree with your first definition of owner occupied, 110%. Owner occupied, you should own it, occupy it, that's where your taxes are. I am okay, and it's not me, it would be up to the board on that stretch for the daughter or son who eventually will end up with that house anyway as part of his ownership in the family. I would be okay with that somewhat of a stretch. Outside of that, I'm not in favor, other than owner occupied as defined as your original definition. That is my opinion on that.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with Tom on that, that if it's not owner occupied, it's basically commercial. And when we look into, like, if, you know, there could be somebody to be called, if there's a problem, they have to respond in a certain amount of minutes. That's just a property management company. So that's a commercial operation at that point.
I think the push, though, is to the renting of the whole home without the owner occupation. That's really what the people are asking for. That's what we've seen. That's what they want to do. That's where the money is in our area. We have a full lack of hotels. I mean, there's nowhere you could stay in Marlborough, but you could rent a house for the weekend. I think that's what we really need to address.
Well, it's all great until it's not next to me in my house, because that's exactly what's going to happen. It's all great and everybody's going to love it, but when it's next to their house, they ain't going to want it, and they're going to be screaming at me. And that's exactly what we don't want.
Yeah, and what it comes down to, Chris, is it's going to come down to, this is going to turn commercial. It's not going to be me renting my house out because I bought another one and I said, I'm just going to Airbnb this. This is going to be a commercial entity that's going to come in, or a group, an LLC that's going to come in, and they're going to buy 15 to 20 homes.
We don't have
that.
that.
Sprinkle.
That's not stretching out. We have
No. Hold on. Don't stop with this. That's not Marlborough stuff. That's called capitalism.
We're trying to address 18 right now. In front of the board, there's a lady that has 2 bungalows. She bought 1 bungalow. She wants to rent the other bungalow. There's no code to say that she can do that with short-term rentals.
Okay, let me ask Dennis a question. Dennis.
And become a bed and breakfast.
Dennis, how many B&Bs are in Woodstock?
Over 400.
Or Airbnbs? How many are in Woodstock?
There's over 400.
Okay, how many did they start with?
Oh, I don't know. We don't have numbers that I don't.
So it could have been 18. So it could have been 18. They started.
You know, it's grown exponentially. It really has, and it not necessarily here in Marlborough, but in other. I mean, I'll give you the example in in other communities in the Catskills, real estate agents are now having conversations at the New York City level, which is make your second home your first home. So they're buying their second home up in the Catskills, renting it out, and keeping their apartment in New York City because it's affordable. I mean, they literally can pay their mortgage on short-term rental. I mean, they can pay a substantial portion of their mortgage on short-term rental fees.
I think, Alan, there's a happy medium here. I think we could compromise on both things. I think Tom is more than willing to do that if we sit down and just come up with something that protects our neighborhood, the safety of our neighborhood. I agree with Tom that probably if you're next to that individual's house and it starts getting too loud and stuff, we had those occasions already in Milton. We went through that whole thing. So I think basically we could look at the different districts. We could formalize something that's in the benefit of the town and possibly the people that are doing the short-term rentals. I don't think it's either or. That's my opinion. I think we have to have an open mind about what's coming down the pike, as you say. So I think this discussion is good with Dennis, and I guess we could go all night, but I prefer not to. So,
well, I think I would just agree with Al. I think that there's no black and white or wrong here. See, in my mind, the main thing is public health and safety, and the second thing is quality of life. And once you get past those regulatory hurdles, then you're really talking about community, what the community really wants to do. And the example I would use in terms of the tolerance of neighborhoods, if I may, is what we see in Saratoga, where for a brief time during the summer, I shouldn't say brief, but for 5 weeks during the summer, the community literally turns itself inside out with respect to tourism and there's parking on lawns, there's all kinds of things that happens up there. And then it goes back to normal once the racing season is open. So if you have particular events like the Orange County Fair or the Dutchess County Fair or the Ulster County Fair or something that happens in Marlborough, or you want to think about a time window where you start to think, well, in this instance, we're going to allow non-owner occupied housing to be rented so that Al could come in and rent something. And then the community knows that there's a time frame. It's think of it as something, it's like farms in harvest time or apple orchards in spring. These are things
right. It's fall for Marlborough. It would be all fall, right?
It's not just.
So I think come up with something that's going to be in time, of course, that we can come up with that's a compromise in all sections. We could be smart about it and do the right thing. I think we're capable of doing that.
So I would just like to thank you all for your time. I'm going to go have dinner. How's that sound?
Dennis, thank you very much for your. I know that this is Thank you very much, Dennis.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Take care, Dennis.
Hey, Dennis.
Somebody's trying to talk.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, ZBA Planning Board. Make sure I got all your names, so this way I can give you some hours on your for credit. Continuing, I think. There's Emily. Hi. There's that smile. Let's bring a little joy to this meeting. Hi.
Hello.
How are you? I think you've been working with Danielle to put up your presentation.
Yeah, I can share my screen. Can you guys see the presentation?
Yep.
See it up there, but you have to click it, yeah.
It's also on our website if anybody.
There you go.
Too good.
There we
It's under
go.
the agendas.
Thank you. Thank you, Anna. She's got it up, Danielle. Thank you.
Yep.
So go ahead.
First, I'd like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my proposed project. And if you don't mind, I'll just go through my slideshow and explain about it. And so first it's called Hydrating the Milton Landing Dog Park. My Girl Scout Gold Award. My name is Emma Greiner. I'm 17 years old and I'm a rising senior at Marlborough High School. I've been a Girl Scout for almost 10 years and my final project as a Girl Scout ambassador will be my Gold Award. So on recent visits to the newly built dog park in Milton, I've noticed that there's no source of water for the dogs. The park is frequently being used by members of our community and their pets. The lack of water source is a problem when pet owners forget to bring a water bottle for their pet, especially in the heat of summer. Although there are scattered water bowls available at the park, there is nowhere to refill them and they are filthy. Reasons why this is a problem is because dogs' body weight are 90% water, and if they have 10% loss, it can cause severe illness or death. The solution is an easy installation of a dog water fountain for all dogs and dog parents at the Milton Landing Dog Park. Some things that I can do are to raise money for the dog fountain and the water bottle refill station, which approximately costs about $4,000. I can work with the company to obtain the fountain. I can install a concrete slab and help with the installation of the fountain. The concrete slab would go around the pergola and the fountain. I could also educate the public about the dangers of dehydration in pets, and I would install a brochure holder and create informative brochures on the kiosk at the dog park. Some things that I will need the town's help with is the permission for the installation of the fountain, and I would need help running the water line into the park, which is approximately 400 feet. I would also need help hooking up the water line to the fountain, and I will need someone who is willing to be my advisor throughout the project. This is a sketch of where the approximate water line would be from point A to B, or there could be an alternate to point C. Yeah, it's currently at A, and I do need it run to B or C. And I know that the park revitalization project includes adding gardens around the park, requiring the extension of water, so I was hopeful that the town might consider running the water line sooner or later. In conclusion, I hope that you find this project helpful to the betterment of the community and the dog park. I hope that you will be able to offer me your permission and assistance as I strive to complete my Girl Scout Gold Award. Is there any questions?
Could we go back to the full screen? Emma, could you turn it over to Howard or Danielle?
I just have a
That's quick, Emma. Thank you.
I have a quick question about the fountain.
Mm-hmm.
The fountain, it would be only for canine use and it wouldn't be for human consumption at all?
It also has, the one I was looking into also has a spot for like a human fountain as well as 2 dog water fountains and a water bottle refill station.
Okay, I'm only bringing that up because there is a possible solution, I believe, to get the water line in there. But I don't believe we're going to meet code, which is either going to be 32 or 48 inches. We're underneath ground, and I believe that's for temperature control, not only in frost, but also in a health benefit of bacteria growth.
So, Emma,
Could be wrong.
Do you have a time frame?
I'd like to get it in before I have to submit my college applications. So,
and before the ground freezes.
Yeah, and before the ground freezes.
So you're thinking 23 this year?
Yeah. As soon as she can, as soon as you can.
As
raise
soon
the
as, yeah, as soon as I'm able to raise the money for the dog fountain, I would like to start working on the water line.
So basically, Councilman Koenig has had a great idea. Uh, How would it, right now, the town is not into position to put in the proper line for the 400 feet, talking to our highway superintendent and talking to our budget officer. We just don't have the funds right now. But Councilman Kena came up with a good idea to put a temporary line, like he suggested. So basically, it'll be almost like we have at the Pruitt Chance Memorial Park, where in the summertime, we turn the water off, and then just before freezing, we turn it off. So it'd be like a temporary thing. Talking to to the water superintendent today, that cost would be relatively between $400 and $500, which I think the board wouldn't have a problem with. So something like that, if you could, if the compromise could be at this particular point, if we could do something like that, I don't think the board would have any problem helping you out as far as the water is concerned. But then again, like Councilman Koenig says, I don't think it'll be we would have to check with the Board of Health and the building code enforcers, see if that's good for consumption by the public. It's about the public safety and welfare.
Yeah, well, it's probably something that we can do is if there was like a bottle filling station or a public water fountain, we maybe just block those two off and just have it for the canine filling station, which I think would be okay for the interim.
Yeah, we could check into the same manufacturer of that water because it's good water, it's all water, but like you said, in above ground, you know, I don't know if the temperature allows it or whatever, but we could check with the Board of Health and check with Tom to see if that's feasible. But I think that's a solution for the time being if the board agrees that's on the Zoom, Ed, Howard, and Alan.
I think it's a great idea. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really nice idea and a nice addition to the dog park, which is used a lot. There are a lot of people down there.
I'm good with that. I'm good with that.
You go off dialogue.
Emma, I think that as far as concrete pad goes, we could help you with that. I could help you with that. I'm familiar with concrete now, doing the all-inclusive playground. So that's that would be relatively simple to do a foundation, concrete foundation for your water fountain. So basically, if it's all right, I could help you out as an advisor also.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And thank you for your presentation. And this is a great project because the dog park is well used, and I think everybody will enjoy the fountain. Thank you very much for thinking
Al, I
about
have a question.
it. Sure.
Emma, I just wanted to ask you, is the Gold Award, is that similar to what Boy Scouts have with Eagle Scout?
Yeah, it's the equivalent of an Eagle Scout.
Okay, I thought so. I just wanted to check. Thank you.
And would you like all her information also?
Yeah, that'd be good. And Emma, last question. Like Boy Scouts have to finish before they're 18. Is that true with this one too?
I have to finish before September of my college freshman year.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Any questions for Emma?
No, it's a great idea. We support it fully. Thank you.
We fully support it. You got the board support. Thank you very much.
Let them know that.
We'll keep in touch.
Yes, we'll keep in touch. I have to get it approved through Girl Scouts, but this was my first step, so I really appreciate the time.
Not a problem. Not a problem at all. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Emma.
Have a good evening. Any comments on the agenda? We had, I don't think we have any new business. Had two great presenters, Emma and the cancer awareness. Anybody want to bring up any new business? We didn't do it in the beginning, so I'm assuming that we're good to go. Just the workshop topics, we did the short-term rentals, COVID-19. I sent a memo out to the board, to all of the directors and from the town that we will be starting next Monday full-time from 8 to 4. Found out also that the school is going to start the next day, which will be September the 1st on Tuesday, 8 to 4. So both the town and the school will be in full swing. Of course, using masks and social distancing and washing your hands and doing all the right precautions to protect our employees. That being said, I have a couple of correspondence. I was told to read this by Colleen, so I'm going to do that. Per conversation with our clerk, Colleen Corcoran, the library is interested in installing a story walk at Cluett Chance Park. A story walk is basically a children's book that has been deconstructed and presented on poster board signs, page by page, on a path or trail. It's something fun for families with young children to safely leave the house and do together, especially during this time of social distancing. I like to install the signs in October and leave them up for 2 weeks. The dates would be 10/19 through 11/2. If the signs are left up for 2 weeks, I'm hoping that this will discourage families from gathering at the park on the same day. So basically, I'm 100% of getting our families out and walking around the park, right, baby girl? So I'm in favor of the library doing this. So I need a motion from the board in support of this. I need a motion.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So moved. Thank you very much, gentlemen. I just got a memo from Highway Superintendent, gentlemen. This is to advise you that Dominic Manisi, holding the position as MEO in the town highway department, has completed his 6-month probationary period as of August the 24th, 2020. I therefore approve him as a full-time employee of the highway department. Just wanted to let you know about that. That's the correspondence. We have one resolution tonight. After that discussion, the resolution is number 66, to reappoint a member to the Board of Assessment Review. Supervisor Lanzetta proposes the following, whereas Jeff Magliato wishes to remain as a member to the Board of Assessment Review. Now therefore resolved that Jeff Magliato be reappointed to the Board of Assessment Review effective 10/01/2020. And moves for its adoption. Colleen? Danielle, sorry.
Councilman Molinelli,
Yes.
Councilman Koenig,
Yes.
Councilman Baker,
Yes.
Supervisor Lanzetta.
Yes. So that being said, as always, Councilman Koenig has a very important announcement to make.
All right, as long as everyone's listening, I'd like to talk about adjournment and look for a motion for adjournment. How's that sound?
That's
Take a second.
Mr. Baker, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So, thank you, everybody. Thank you for participating.
Good night.
Thank you, chap.
Bye.